See how that goes. So just to start off, a little bit about me. My name's Craig Porteous. I'm a business intelligence admin slash developer. I work for Monster Worldwide in Glasgow, so we've got quite a big kind of DB Tech contingent there. I say big, there's about 15 of us in the office that kind of cross functions and DBA developers, things like that. I've worked with SQL for about 10 years in various different positions, moving from developer more into the administration side, and then kind of falling into sort of DevOps practices and PowerShell over the last couple of years. So that's just been about 3 years I've been using PowerShell. That started off with SharePoint, basically the creation of team sites and things, which were an absolute disaster and a nightmare to do yourself. So I put some PowerShell scripts together to basically have that create at the click of a button. I write some blog posts for SQL Shack, and I'm also the co-leader of the SQL Glasgow user group, which Paul's already mentioned. There's some of my contact details there. I've got a couple of things up on GitHub.
Not on the screen, Craig.
Sorry?
We can't, or I can't see any of the contact details on the screen. All I can see is your desktop
Oh,
of, is that Glasgow? Yeah, that's a BBC building.
it is, yeah. Let me see.
You can, when you're the presenter, you can actually share individual apps, or you can share your desktop, or it might be that maybe you've clicked the wrong
I think I set it to share
ticky
desktop.
box. Ah, right. If you open up PowerPoint's there.
Is that it now?
Yeah, that's it now.
It was just showing the everything under what I was showing.
Ah, right, right.
So you've not
Okay.
missed much, just my face there. Um, so yeah, I've got a GitHub account there, and a lot of the stuff up there was created before I kind of went through the basics and stuff. So there's not too much up there. So kind of moving on. So the first thing I want to kind of cover is the basics of what I'm doing here. Basically, the what I'm actually using to connect to Power BI within PowerShell. There's a couple of different methods to do that. I've covered this in a previous presentation for the SQL user group. So if any of you had made it along to that, sorry for kind of going over the same ground. That was mainly for Ewan, which I don't see him on the call here today, but um, so there's a couple of ways to connect is using the MS Online module, which Microsoft considers version 1 from connecting through Azure, and the Azure AD module, which is their preferred method. These are actually two very powerful ways to connect to Azure, and as a standard user, you can pull back information like Power BI licenses, in fact all licenses across Azure, across all users. You can pull back information on all the Power BI workspaces, which if you've used much Azure AD or Azure, you'll know is sort of this generic group type thing that covers SharePoint groups and also Power BI and security groups as well. But the main thing I'm going to explore here is the Power BI REST API. There's a few prerequisites for this. As it says at the bottom there, I cover some of this in a previous blog post. But there's a few prerequisites for connecting with the Power BI REST API. So it's not the easiest thing to get running when you're wanting to connect unattended. Basically, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can connect where it has the Azure pop-up that basically asks you for your login credentials every time, or I think you can set it to store them, or using it unattended where you can have a script firing off in the background without actually having to interact with it. So I'll just run through them. Or I'll run through them when I cover the authentication part. So the first part is basically I want to talk about the problems that I faced that kind of brought up this within Power BI. is basically the refresh failure notifications. The things that are affected when you're using Power BI, so it's basically all your data sources that use a refresh. If I just jump out, I've got a note of these here. So looking at the on-premises data gateway, you can see here you've got an option of live or direct query or user configured manual or scheduled refresh. So every single data source here that has a yes next to it, which is everyone connecting through the on-premises data gateway, has a requirement for some sort of manual or scheduled refresh. There's some of them in here, as you can see, can be set up as live and direct query, and if you have them in that mode, then you don't need to worry about the refresh schedules or any refresh failures. So there's only a few options really. You're talking about Amazon Redshift, you've got analysis services there, Impala, SAP, things like that, but generally your SQL databases, you can set them up in live direct query, but you may generally have these in a refresh basis. So jumping back, the main way that Power BI lets you know that something's went wrong with your data sources, your data sets, sorry, is through built-in notifications. I'll show you an example of them just now. So this is an example of the data source that I'm going to use in the demo, or the data set, sorry. If it wasn't obvious, that's the name of the data set, and that's all the information that you have. So you can see it's quite basic. There's no link, there's no further information on why it's failed, just this cute little oops, something went wrong. You'll also find that if I click on learn more, if this actually opens, let's try opening a new window. Learn more actually takes you to a dead page, which is helpful.
Glad we're all sitting down for that one. That was a shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Microsoft deadline.
Yeah, so I mean this is the kind of thing. It's in Power BI, which is being updated on a monthly basis. You'd think that that would be something they would keep an eye on, but you've also got these activity IDs and request IDs. I believe these are helpful if you contact Microsoft technical support. They use them to track down what went wrong, but from a user perspective, if you want to try and fix this yourself, you're on to peanuts basically. So it was these kind of issues that led me to down the path of actually finding an alternative way to deal with failed data source refreshes. You've also got the other caveat that email that I showed you, this one here, will only come to the owner of the dataset. So if a user deploys a dataset to Power BI, just minimize this. So looking at Power BI, you can see the dataset's been configured by me. If a user deploys this dataset, they will become the owner. An admin can take over the dataset, or any other user that has access to that workspace and that dataset or the reports within it can take over the dataset. So depending on who owns this at the time of the failure is the person who gets the notification. You can see that's just dictated by this refresh failure notification email down the bottom here. So it's not really ideal, and it's not really something that's a robust system to basically alert on these errors. There's the output there for you. So this is where I wanted to start using PowerShell for these datasets. I'd already used PowerShell with Power BI, and this kind of became an extension of that. So there's quite a few prerequisites for getting started when you're using the Power BI REST API and also these scripts. The first prerequisite is the ADAL module, and that basically allows you to connect through Active Directory. You've also got a Power BI server-side app that needs to be set up, and then you've got to grant the app permissions via Azure, and then you'll also need your tenant ID, but I've actually managed to work around that last requirement, and if the user doesn't provide it to the script, then I can actually grab that anonymously. So if I jump back here, I can actually show you. So this is where you create a Power BI app. You can do it through Azure if you're familiar with it as well, but this is the way that if you're just using it for Power BI, this is the easiest and the fastest way. So if I do test, make sure I'm selecting a server-side app, and then I can put any URL in here because we're not going to be using any sort of redirection. These kind of redirections are usually required if you want to have authentication made and then a redirection to a page. Then you choose the APIs that you want to access. So I'm only really going to use this for the Dataset API, so I would just tick these and then I simply register the app. Now you need to make note of the client ID and the client secret. You can get to the client ID again through Azure, but you will never be able to see the secret again. So if you don't make a note of it in this page, refresh and start again. So if I jump over to the Azure management portal, the next thing you need to do is essentially grant permissions on that app. So because we're not going to log into that app directly using an interactive login, we need to grant permissions so that it can be used with the unattended method. So I've made a shortcut here for app registrations. This is the kind of thing that any user would have access to under Azure. You don't necessarily need to be an admin. Most of this you probably won't see or you won't have access to, but if you go to app registrations, it will have your app that you've registered. So you can see here the test PSUG app, and that's the application ID that we've seen on the first screen over here. So jumping back, what we want to do is once I've clicked on that, we want to click on required permissions, and then all you're doing is grant permissions, and it's saying, do you want to grant the permissions below for all accounts in the current directory? Yep, that's fine. That's that done. So that now you can step away from this page, assuming you've made a note of the client secret, and this page as well. So that's the authentication requirements, and the ADAL module is handled within the PowerShell script that I've created. These other parts, as you've seen, need to be handled by through the web page. So if I open up the scripts, so I've actually split these into a couple of modules. The main script here is a Power BI dataset alerting, and then I've created two modules, two functions, basically just for things that I'm going to reuse. These are going to be built into a module at some point whenever I get around to it, with some other useful functions. But the one we want to look at is the auth token unattended here. So this is basically just taking your Power BI account name. This has to be an account that has access to the data set that you're looking at. So if you use like a global account that has access to everything, like a sort of admin for Power BI, then that's ideal here. If not, then you want to use one that has access to the data sets you want to see. You'll always have situations where users will be creating their own workspaces, they'll be creating their own reports and data sets, and without some sort of higher level Azure or Power BI admin, you just don't have access to them, and you kind of need to just move on basically. But this should be able to get you through as much as you can, and if you have buy-in from your users, you can get them to add that account if they want visibility of dataset refresh failures. So the three requirements are the tenant ID, the client ID, and the client secret. I'm basically just checking if the tenant ID is not the right length, because we can't actually check the specific value. Then it's taking the domain of the user that's provided, splitting that up, and then doing a web request that basically does an anonymous check and pulls back the tenant ID. So this will work for anything, like if I put in SQL Glasgow here. Okay. and fire that off. You can see that's the tenant ID for SQL Glasgow. So that's pretty handy. It'll get you the tenant ID without having to get it through other means. There's another couple of ways to do it, but this is probably the easiest, either executing this script or going through the Azure management portal. So I'm then basically building up a couple of URLs, the authority URL using the tenant ID and the resource URL because it's the Power BI API we're using. And the next section here is basically to check that the Microsoft ADAL PowerShell module is installed. If not, it installs the module. Once I go through my demo, I'll be able to show that to you, and you'll see that the first time you run this, you want to run it in Visual Studio Code or the PowerShell window rather than unattended, because you need to make sure that that the module's installed, and it will prompt you if it's pulling it down from the PowerShell gallery. So the way I'm actually using the authentication here is I'm using an encrypted file which will be used for the password. This basically tests if the encrypted file exists. I'm naming the encrypted file just with the username that it's encrypting and the user that's encrypted it. So that's quite important because the user that's encrypted it is the only one that can decrypt the file. We're then basically testing if that exists. If it does, pulling out the contents and passing it as a secure string. The only thing that I'm concerned about from a security perspective is this next part, which basically pulls the password from the secure string out into plain text, because that has to be passed through in the auth body when it's passed to the API. So this is actually coming through in plain text, but I'm wiping these variables straight away. And I guess it depends on the use case and your security policies within your organization, whether that's something that's acceptable or not. But once it does that, all it's really doing is invoking the REST method, which is returning this auth variable, which is basically just your token, your auth token, and then that passes it back to the main script. So jumping back to this. The next component is the notification function. So this is fairly basic, and I wanted to make it as reusable as possible. It was nice and simple when I was building this within Monster's infrastructure, but then when I went to create it outside of Monster, I realized that I needed a mail server outside of Monster, and I also needed one that I had to authenticate to. So I added a bit more complexity to it. So you can see there's a number of parameters required here. The first couple is the subject, so what you want the subject to the email to be, a title which will be used in the main body, and then HTML content. So what are you passing to the email? What is it you want the email to represent? Is it going to be an error? Is it going to be content that's going to be passed out to users? We've then got a couple of variables for logo, alt text for logo, a theme that will be used to sign off the email, and then the alert color. So this has been quite handy. I've implemented this so that we can have alert colors that basically show red when there's been a failure, there's an error. So I'm using this to basically generate errors as well. If I jump back to the unattended here, you can see in the catch statement it actually calls that. So that spits out errors in this same format as well, with just a red banner at the top. And then we've got the mail server settings, so that's your mail server, the from address and the to address. I'm doing a quick regex to basically check that the alert color is a valid color. And then we're basically going into the same credential pullback. So this credential is what's going to be used for the mail server. So if your mail server is using the same credentials that your Power BI account uses, then perfect. you can actually reuse the same file because it's going to be opened by the same user. If not, it will create a secondary encrypted file here. I can actually show you that. It's just a long string here. And I closed that, whoops. So that's basically building up the credential, which will be used when the mail, send mail message is used. And then building up the HTML header and then the HTML body and piecing in the components that I want to add. So most of this is basically just a carbon copy of the lovely layout of the Microsoft email. And at the end here, it's just basically sending the message. So I've added use SSL and the port number and the credentials, which if you're in a standard kind of corporate environment with an Exchange server, you shouldn't need any of them, and you shouldn't need the authentication chunk in here as well. So jumping back, the next one's the demo. So I'll just jump onto a remote desktop here I had, and I can show you the actual script. So there's some comments and things here, some information I've tried to add. Basically the main parameters that you're accepting are very much what's required for the auth token, or the authentication function, sorry. So it's your Power BI account, your tenant ID if you wish to provide it, the client ID and the client secret. I've then got an integer here of max time. So that's basically just a capture to basically say that we don't want to alert on things that are older than 30 minutes. I'll jump back out and just run through how the actual script works, and then I can show you the code. So the first thing we're doing is authenticating to Power BI, and that's using the function. We're then going into Power BI and retrieving all of the workspaces that user can see. Once we've got them, we're basically stepping through every single workspace to pull back all the datasets within that workspace, and then for each dataset we're basically getting the last refresh info for the dataset. Once we've got that, we want to ask, has the refresh failed? If it has, is it a scheduled refresh? And at that point we're going to force a refresh using the API. So the API for Power BI is pretty good. You can not only pull back information, but you can push information as well. You can deploy reports using it. You can force refreshes like this. So if this is a failure and it's an on-demand dataset, so that's one that the user just clicks themselves, it's not going to do anything. Excuse me. So the next thing it wants to do, once it's forced the refresh, this is something that can really be dependent on the type of data source you've used. So this is something that if it has failed before, it could fail immediately. It could take 10 minutes to fail, it could take 15, half an hour. It really depends on the type of failure or what's causing the problem. So what I have done is set this script up to run every 15 minutes. So it goes through all of this process again, and then when it reaches this point and finds another failed dataset, it will be able to distinguish the ones that we have forced the refresh, because it'll be tagged with via API, and at that point when it finds one, it'll send the alert email, and that just calls the alert email function. So if I go back to this, you can just see the first things we're doing is pulling in these two functions. There's definitely a better way to do this, but it was really just a first past the post kind of situation. The next thing is checking for this tenant ID. If it's null, let's grab it using this anonymous check. Then we're authenticating to Power BI. We're then taking this token, the authentication token, and adding it to the auth header prefixed with bearer. Again, as I was saying before, you've got the catch statements here, which will actually pull the email function as well and pass through the exception message, which is pretty handy. So then you've got like a consistent approach that you can have branded properly, and all your errors are coming out and alerts are coming out looking the same. So the first thing you're doing is pulling back all the groups, and it's really just as simple as this API, pull back groups and then invoke the REST method. And then the next thing we want to do is basically store the time interval provided to basically say this is our max time, so we basically want to look at things no older than 30 minutes. If we've got a data set that's failed and then we've tried to execute it manually and it's failed again, then we want some time to work on it. Basically, we want some time to be able to fix that issue. It might not be something we can fix in 10 minutes, it might be something that's going to take days to fix, so we don't want alerts generated every 15 minutes. The next thing we're doing is basically going through all of the groups within the groups. So each individual group is then passed using the group ID. If I jump over to Power BI, I can show you that. So you can see here you've got app.powerbi.com groups, and then you've actually got this group ID. So that's the one that actually gets passed to the API, and then you've also got a dataset ID, which is great that they're using this kind of consistent ID, because then I can actually pass that back in to the alert email to bring you back to this page, which I'll cover later. So it's passing through the group ID, it's then building the URI for the API again using the groups path variable, and then it's invoking that REST method again, and then we're basically going through another for each for the datasets. One thing that I had to add in is basically is this check to basically say, is the dataset refreshable? We were coming across a few issues where I was finding streaming datasets or the live direct query datasets. I was trying to pull back the information that basically would never exist in these because there's no refresh information for those datasets. So you just need to prefix it with that to make sure you're looking at the right ones. It then brings back the refresh information for each dataset. It looks at the most recent refresh information, which is why I've got the 0 in here. Finds out if it's failed and is the type scheduled, and then that's when it invokes a post basically on the same URI here for refreshes. So that's the first loop round. Second loop round, it's going to come here, it's going to find it's failed, it's then going to find that it's via the API and it's within our time window, and that's when we start to build our email. So the title is Power BI dataset alerting, subject is going to be based on the title and the name of the dataset. It then builds a wee bit of HTML to basically represent the group and the dataset that's failed, and then it invokes the alert email. And then that's us, basically, that's our catch statement. So if I jump back to Power BI, so if I look at the refresh history, you can see we had two completed ones. We had a scheduled completed one, then we had a scheduled failure just at 7 o'clock there. You can see it took 13 minutes to realize that it failed. And that's simply because I took the database offline. Oops. So if I come back in here, I can then jump over to the script, and I can use the example script here, and then I'll just execute that. So you can see I'm only providing the username, I'm providing the client ID and client secret. And if I fire that off, that'll basically just run through everything that we've seen there, and it'll try to re-execute the data source, the dataset, sorry. I should be able to go over and see. Okay, so it's not started it yet. I've got a funny feeling nothing's happening here. There we go. So I've declined this for some reason, so I need to install, this is what I was talking about earlier, I need to install the module, and unless you've already set the PS repository as trusted for the PowerShell gallery, then this will prompt basically asking for you to set it. So I'll just jump out of that and I'll re-execute that again. There we go. Okay, so I'll give that a minute to catch up. There we go. So hit yes, I want to install it. And then it's going to discover that it doesn't have a credential file for me for this user because I'm working within this domain lab. So it's going to prompt me for, there you go, so please enter a password for that user that I provided here in the username. And that's my Power BI user. So there we go. And you can see that's it fired off. And if I jump over to Power BI, you can see this one is on demand and it's in progress. So I'll just give this a minute because it's definitely going to fail again. Might take a couple of minutes to do this. So just to kind of jump ahead, once we have the Power BI refresh failing and then the script is going to run again within 15 minutes. This is basically what it's going to find, or this is basically what it's going to output. I've used the SQL Glasgow user group logo there, but you can use your company logo. You've also got the title there, Power BI Dataset Alerting, and it's basically telling you that the scheduled and forced refreshes have both failed for the following dataset, and then please investigate. So it gives you a link to the workspace and it gives you a link to the dataset and then signs it off with whatever your team or user may be. Hopefully that'll be finished. Yep, so we've got a failure there again and that's been done on demand. Don't think it actually shows you that it's via the API at this point, but you can see it from when you connect via the API, it shows that information. So I'll just run the script again. So it's discovering that that has failed twice, and it should just kick out an alert now. Okay, so I'll jump over to my email. There we go. So that's our alert email. I can open this up. It's telling me the workspace and it's telling me the dataset. If I click on the dataset, I think this happened last time. I'll open that in a new window. It takes me straight to the dataset. So you can see the data gateway is offline. It's got a bit more information about the error, but generally Power BI isn't going to give you very much in terms of error messages anyway, but at least gets you a lot closer than the built-in scripts, which is pretty handy. So basically the next kind of steps that I'm looking at, or the next steps with the scripts, is basically to query Power BI metadata with the API, then store the metadata within SQL, and then feed that back into a Power BI dashboard, which results in Inception, obviously. So I've got a little script just to do that quickly just now, which is this one, Power BI Dataset SQL. This just uses the same kind of methods and components here. We've got the same two functions for making the unattended authentication and using the alert email. I've just chucked in my tenant ID, client ID, and client secret here for quickness. But you can see this is doing a lot of the same things. It's stepping through all the groups, it's stepping through all the data sets, then it's stepping through all the refreshes, but it's grabbing the most recent refresh and it's building that up here into an array, and then that array is we're then connecting to a SQL database, cleaning some of the information, like if you've got situations where you've got a John O'Brien, and then building a SQL insert statement to insert those records or update them if there has been any changes. So if I jump up to this, I can then execute this one. So that's just spitting out to a SQL database that I've got running, this Domain Labs SQL 1. Which if I jump over here, I can show you. So I've created this BI metadata database. If I open this up, I had already created the table for this, unless this is going to fail. It's taking quite a while. So while that's loading, this is basically just pulling back, there we go, it's basically pulling back the most recent dataset refresh information. This is something that you could build out to pull back all dataset refresh information, so you could build trend graphs within Power BI to show if datasets are taking longer and longer to refresh, or if there's certain datasets that are failing on a regular basis. You can track that as well. The only information I've really pulled back here is the last refresh point, so that you can see at a glance all the datasets that you have and when the last refresh was and what the result was. This is also quite handy because it returns the owner of the dataset. So as I was saying right back at the start, if you have an owner that is basically saying that is basically one of the users, and you're getting failures for the datasets, you're not seeing those dataset failures. This basically highlights that, and you can see how many datasets that you need to switch over to be managed by an admin account or your own account. And this is taking forever, so I'll leave it just now and come back to it. That's everything I had just now. Is there any questions? No questions?
Nobody got any questions?
I'm glad you're all still here.
Craig, you mentioned earlier about having to send the password in plain text.
Yeah.
Could you not? Could you maybe send that over HTTPS? Would that not sort of secure it that way, or is that still considered a risk?
Well, you do have the added bonus that you're sending this over. You're invoking the REST method, which I believe is going over HTTPS anyway. So you've got the HTTPS here, but just if in situations where you might be within a financial organization, sometimes even just the fact that this is in the code is plain text is a risk. If someone else was to open this code up, they couldn't decrypt the password because it could only be decrypted by that specific user. But maybe this naming convention, if someone had my account, then they could get in and they could see this content. So
Yeah, I see what you mean.
it's really just a level of risk, what you're most comfortable with, or what your organization's most comfortable with.
Sure.
I'll see if this is still not loaded. Handy. Let's see if I can load this up in the server here. Might take a wee while. I understand there's probably not a lot of people that use Power BI, and certainly there may be not as many that would need to administer it in such a way. But this is certainly something that you can do for quite a lot of things. You can see the Power BI datasets. You could see quite a lot of information. If I see if I can bring up the Power BI API help, is actually pretty good on the Microsoft site. Some of the things I'm looking into just now is management of the management of permissions. If I jump back to Power BI, you can see you've got your workspace here. If I click on the workspace, you've got 3 different workspaces here. So if I click on this one, you can click on members. Oh, sorry, that's jumping out to this. There we go. Sorry, edit workspace. You can see a list of the members here. You've got restrictions that you can't use AD or Azure Active Directory groups in this at this point, and it's very difficult to manage this without having to come in here all the time and look at specific groups. So there's Power BI commands, API commands that you can use to basically pull that information out. So if you needed to do any sort of checks that a single user was a member of all of the workspaces, you can do that. And one of the good things about using the Azure AD module that I'd mentioned right back at the start is that within that you can actually see all groups. So this one here, Azure AD and MS Online, you can actually see all workspaces, whether you have permission to them or not. You can also see the owners of them, which is pretty good. So if you're in charge of managing Power BI or any sort of involvement on that level, then as users create their own workspaces, you can keep an eye on it for looking for duplication and things like that, which is pretty handy. So this is connected. Maybe I'll be able to see the table in here. It's still opening. Nope, it's not playing ball. Anyone want to stall with some questions?
See the link that you were talking about for, I mentioned about the Power BI gateway, and you said you'd wrote a post on SQL Shack. Is that the link that's in the slides?
So the one that's in the slides is a link to the, let me just jump out here.
I think it's the third slide in. More info on my blog post, that one.
So
is that it, the other one you were talking about? No,
no, this one's basically around connecting with PowerShell. So this is the initial one that I've done to basically query Power BI. So this is talking about the being able to hit Power BI using the modules to get license information. Basically what I was just mentioning. So you've got the three different options here, and basically what those three different options can do. What the Power BI API can do, and what you can do with Azure AD and MS Online. So they're both kind of quite powerful in their own way. That Azure AD and MS Online, you've essentially got access to read everything, whereas the Power BI API can do a lot more, but you're very much restricted to what the user can do and see. So you've got a bit of a trade-off either way. But yeah, if you have a look at that, I believe the other article is in here somewhere. This is just running terribly today. So considerations for on-premises data in Power BI.
Right, that's in June. Okay.
So that's probably the one you're looking for. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
if I'd say so myself.
No, any information I can get, I'm happy with.
Okay, so I don't think I'm going to get to show you this table. You just need to take my word for it.
So it's doing what all good demos do.
Yeah.
Work on the actual day. Yeah.
It is, yeah. So yeah, that's everything I had. Here's the slide with all the resources that I used as part of that. So I'm actually putting together a blog post on this topic. So if you keep an eye out in SQL Shack for that, it's basically what we kind of discussed here tonight, which I'm hoping to kind of expand more into a longer session on basically the interaction between Power BI and PowerShell and all the other extra things that you can do. And that's me. Thank you.
Cool.
Oh, thanks, Craig. Very informative.
Cheers.
Can I ask you one question, Craig, on
Of course.
a bit of your code? I'm just wondering why you did one particular thing. Could you jump back to your VS Code?
Yep. Okay.
See there, just at the top, you've got parameter username, and you've got read host.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason you've done it that way, not like the other ones where you've put, I don't know if it's in that actual function, there was another function where you had the parameter set as mandatory.
Yeah, so with this one, where is it? So Um, I don't know actually. I think it's one I've just missed where it's not been set as
Okay.
mandatory. I wanted to really just show something that rather than just a username prompt, people knew what I was looking for if they were using the script interactively. But if there's a better way to do it, then by all means, correct me. As I said, a lot of this was quite messy until a couple of days ago, where I basically built built out a lot of the kind of try catch and made it a bit more accessible. And it's
You
something that
tidied the house because guests were turning up, kind of thing.
exactly, yes, yeah. That's, do you know, that's a perfect way to describe it. Yeah. So
Friends are coming for the weekend. I must get things tidy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if you have a look at the kind of scripts that I generally use, or that I've been working on kind of day to day stuff, it's there's a lot of back of the napkin kind of things, um, stuff just chucked together. So those are the nice scripts that I show everyone during presentations.
As long as it works, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
exactly.
if you're going to put it out there and build it into a module and make it open source or put it on GitHub for other people, then yeah, fair enough. You might tidy up